Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar today, Metrics Made Manageable, Making Plan Giving Data Work for You and Your Organization. My name is Nathan Stelter. I'm the president here at the Stelter Company, and happy and honored to introduce you to our presenter today. And before I do that, I did just want to say a couple quick words around our webinar series that I think many of you are probably familiar with, but Stelter here as an expert advocate for asset-based giving. We're committed to providing innovative solutions and education like this for our industry and pride ourselves on being what we call a bridge builder for the nonprofit community. And as such, always happy to host these complimentary webinars like the one today, as well as a whole slate that we've had throughout the entire year, connecting you to experts like Stacy from across the country to assist you in maximizing revenue across your portfolios. Today's webinar is actually the 9th. And our final webinar of our 2022 curriculum. We've been blessed this year to have some amazing presenters like Stacy and Brian Klontz, Pamela Davidson, Eddie Thompson, Elizabeth Ayers, just to name a few. If you did miss any of those presentations, we do archive them and save them in our online library, which is actually stelter.com/webinars. The recordings, the slides should all be accessible and available there. And we are actually in the midst and finalizing our 2023 curriculum. So always looking for feedback. I know Jen will always queue up and have a survey at the end of the talk today. So if there's an outstanding speaker you've heard as one of your councils or even the national conference or presentation or topic you'd be interested in, please let us know. We'll see what, if anything, we can do to accommodate as we put together our curriculum for 2023. But really, I want to make sure we get to why you're here today and the presentation Stacy Sulman is joining us for. Stacy is the Chief Legal Officer and Managing Director of Plan Giving for the American Committee for the Weizmann Institute of Science in New York, where she's worked now for over 14 years. In that capacity, Stacy oversees plan giving and estate settlements, gift compliance, and structuring and general legal affairs. Stacy previously served as Associate Director and General Counsel for the Jewish Community Foundation of Metro West, New Jersey. She's actually teaching or been teaching plan giving at NYU's George Heyman Jr. Program for Philanthropy and Fundraising, and has also taught at the University of Arizona College of Law. She currently serves as the immediate past president of the Philanthropic Planning Group of Greater New York, one of the Pygmies, actually, I believe tomorrow, celebrating their 50th anniversary, which is amazing for that group. Previously, Stacy served on the boards of Goucher College, Hillel and Daughters of Israel, a skilled nursing facility in New Jersey. Stacy received her JD from the University of Arizona College of Law and her bachelor's degree from Bryn Mawr College. Also spent graduate year at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem as a Royal Wallenberg Scholar. So a lot of great things. We're so excited to have Stacy on board here, and obviously metrics being such a critical part of all of our worlds to spend the next 60 minutes discussing this. So Stacy, it is all yours.
Well, thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Jen, and thanks to Stelter for including me in this illustrious panel or series of speakers. It's really, really an honor. And I'm glad to talk about this topic, which has become kind of an area of interest for me for the last little over a year and a half, particularly, although I've been working on it for a while internally in my organization. Just as a little background, this started, actually, I submitted almost 2 years ago, a proposal for a workshop for the national conference for not this conference, but the one before. And it was accepted. And my idea was I was trying to figure out how to make metrics manageable. So I thought, let me do an interactive workshop and we'll figure it out together. And I mean, I pre-thought a lot and I wrote an article, obviously, but that was really the genesis of this. And so I came up with these ideas from that. And then I've spoken about it a few times since, and it's evolved over time. But really the idea is, everyone's talking about using metrics. There's national standards, there's case standards, but the idea is, how do you actually do it? And the point for this was, for me and for colleagues and for others, kind of starting at the beginning. How can we make metrics work? And so I hope through the next hour, we'll come up with some shared understanding. There's no magic, solution here. It's like an ongoing work in progress, but we'll work on it together. Okay, so let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, whoops, I did backward. So the challenge with plan giving, we all know this, is that to do metrics in plan giving is not easy because it's very uncertain. You're dealing with more than in any other field. And by the way, my organization, and I'm sure yours, in major gifts, in principal gifts, you have you know them, you're expecting this amount of money in 3 years, and it's quantifiable. But with plan giving, obviously, you don't know when the donor will pass away, and you hope they don't anytime soon. You don't know exactly how much it will be. You might know if they do a pledge, but very often it's uncertain, or that's just a piece of it. And you can't be sure that you're going to stay in their estate. You can hope, and you have good stewardship that will help, but there's a lot of uncertainty. So it's, I think, more challenging in plan giving to come up with metrics that are meaningful. And that's sort of the sort of overarching challenge that we're all trying to address. Of course, the national guidelines are there as a guide, a very important guide. And they have the 3 categories. Category A for outright goal, for gifts that are you get now. B is for basically life income gifts. And C is gifts that are revocable, but you know you're going to get it when the person dies. And the idea is, how do you count them now? For my organization, A and B have always been easy. I'll be honest, C is their challenge for us. And we're still working on it, but this exercise that I've gone through has helped me make the case for that category C. There's also CASE, which has similar standards. They count, by the way, the category C, I think it's now 65 and up. Certain universities, not all. I actually just learned about some of these. There's some analysis that many universities count 65 and up revocable. Some don't count anything. Some count everything, any revocable gift. So, there's a disparity, and basically different institutions have different policies for what to count. And the challenge is, what works for your organization? I found some cute cartoons. I'm not even good. You'll just look at them. Okay. But I think the point of it is that in the end, it's coming up with metrics that work for your team. And I think that in a way, that's where I come to it, maybe different than some other speakers. Maybe some say these are the metrics you need to use, but ultimately, if you're just sitting in your desk, in your office, using these, it may not matter. You want people that review your work or see your work to actually buy into them and care about them. And that's the challenge too. So to start, this is very simple. These are just from Google, but some key definitions. And I think these are often used interchangeably, so I think it's important to clarify. What data are the facts and statistics? That's the raw data, the facts, statistics at your disposal. Metrics are when you do something with them. You show change. You compare something. And something else that I talk about a bit are trends, which are general directions in the field that can bolster your argument. Okay. So what I've come up with, and originally it was 5, but you'll see as I discussed today, I'm getting to my 6th. You'll get there. But it really is 5 steps to manageable metrics. How do you make, what are the things you need to do, you can do to help own the metrics in your organization, in your department at least? Okay. They sound really simple, but I don't think, and they seem intuitive, but I don't know if everyone's doing this, because it took me to go through this to kind of get the buy-in I need. First of all, start with your audience. Don't start with the metrics. Start with the people that you need to persuade or to care about your metrics. And think about who they are, what is their motivation, what story do they want to hear? So we're talking about your CEO, your CFO. I think for me, what changed is now I'm on the management team, and so I have to make sure that that people care about what I'm talking about, and it's not just in my little department. It's your board. What motivates them? It might be a beneficiary for us. I work for the American Committee for the Weizmann Institute of Science, which is an Israeli institution. So what do they care about? What's going to make them excited about my metrics? And it could be a donor too, depending on what you're trying to prove. But I start with the audience. It's a very pragmatic approach, you might say. Then, and this is very related, what is it that moves them? What is their bottom line? What will make them excited? So if your CEO or your CFO cares about ROI, so make sure that you're addressing that. Again, not just coming up with statistics, but actually thinking about what matters to them. Whoops, what happened there? Okay, so what does that individual or entity care about? what will they want to see? Pretty simple. All right. Number 3. Look, this is maybe where it gets a little bit less simplistic. What resources do you have to give you data? And I will, by the way, towards the end, I go through a lot of charts that I've come up with to give you some examples. But again, these are based on what I have. But start with what you have. Again, if you want to start with, rather than starting with sort of case standards and national standards, think about you have things that you have readily in your CRM, perhaps. Number of people who've attended programs, number of legacy donors this year than last. What is the data that you have? So, look at what you're collecting and think about what you have at the ready. Okay. Now this is where metrics come in. Show some change. Start with this. So, this is an analysis I did. It's actually, I gotta take my picture out of here. All right. So you can see, this is just an example. We looked at a period during the pandemic to the year after, different types of gifts. So you can see, we just made some comparisons, the number of new CGAs we got. So blue is during the pandemic and orange is right before and right after. So this is an actually interesting story of how giving changed. And I mean, the numbers may or may not be exactly right, but the point is, look how giving changed in the year of the pandemic and the year before and the year during. It's really interesting. Here's another example of something. This is a very easy one. We looked at all of our legacy events. These were all virtual. And we compared how many people keep coming to how many people are brand new to each one. And this actually tells a couple of different stories. One is that people don't repeat that much, but it could be that you could also say that we're expanding to a much wider audience too. Again, everyone has these types of analysis. It's not that hard, but it is the basis of developing a set of metrics. Here's another one, kind of similar to the other, but what we track, so we did a whole study that precipitated this, is each department was asked to come up with a key performance indicator. And after much analysis, we decided to track what we call leads, which are all responses, substantive responses to all outreach efforts. We define substantive responses as putting a check, anything but a check or money, because our goal is not really to get that check. That may be annual giving's goal. Our goal is to get someone to say something about, you're in my will, I want to know more about estate giving, I want to do a CGA, please send me more information, that kind of thing. So we tracked it and we compare responses over these same 2 years. So I think it's really telling how people, and we do it year after year. This is a set of metrics that are at your disposal. This isn't hard to accumulate. It's just you have it, and it tells a really interesting story, which I'll get to in a minute. We also look at, if this was a virtual event, but we compared all the areas that RSVPs came in. This was easy. We just had people's addresses. We ran a chart. And by the way, just to give a little context, these charts, and I probably have young people, I don't know the age of people in the audience, but for people like me in the 50s, this looks really cool and amazing. But these are really easy to do on Excel. And I have staff people in their 20s and they probably did it in college. And it's like a button you press on Excel and it gives you all these options of how to do these metrics. So it's not how to do these charts. And then you can snip them and put them in your presentations and it looks really good. And it's very easy. Let's see, here's another one. These are just comparisons of different hits of our website. And what's really interesting about this one is we can look, this is from Google. We can see that we have more hits when we have when there's a mailing, or we can look at virtual events or mailings and see, are they leading people to the website? And so this is just one example. We compared the opening page, and then we also compared if people click donor stories. This, by the way, is interesting because we had a donor story in one of our mail pieces. And so obviously, actually 100 people clicked on that donor story, which is kind of cool. Okay. Now is probably where it gets less, it's really where you have to be a little bit creative, or maybe a lot. And this is when I did a workshop a number of years ago, or last year, I'm sorry, at National, this is where we kind of broke up into tables and talked about, you have these statistics, you have to use these to demonstrate something, right? The effectiveness of what you're trying to do. So that's where you have to kind of, and you have to make it tell a story. So some questions you might want to answer with yours. How do we demonstrate the success of our programming? What's the ROI from our direct mail? The yellow one, do our plan giving efforts work? That's the biggie. And that's probably where national standards, and I'll get to that, will come in and help you there. Is our website reaching prospects? There's a lot of different things you can answer with your stats. You don't always have to go straight to the standard. You can start with much smaller ones. So this looks a little bit ugly, so I'm sorry. This is maybe where I need someone, but it's really interesting. So I'm going to just show you. This is something that's really helpful. So deceased, these are people in our legacy society who fulfilled their commitments. And so we did this analysis. I'll give you guys a second to take a look. The bottom line is, in the last 4 years, everybody who had passed away, we had 100% fulfillment of estate commitments. I use this to make the case for revocable gifts. In the last 8 years, 98%. We basically, I'd say 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we really jump-started our legacy campaign in a very strategic way. We always had one, but it became maybe a little bit more public-facing with our board. And you can see that, and we also made it a little bit rigorous. Now, we were a little more thoughtful in tracking. I would say that's the change. When we tracked people to be in our legacy society, we had a little more, it wasn't just like there was a little more thought in how we tracked it. It was more organized. And you can see over 11 years, 95, sorry about that. Next. 95% of the people that told us that we were in their estate, whether they signed something or not, that we included in our honor society over 11 years, it came to fruition. And as we over time, it even became 100%. And I think these are the stats, because I have colleagues who worked at major universities, and they always have these stats, like 100% of people tell us that we're in their will fulfill it. And that is a very persuasive argument. And maybe if any of you guys can do this with a better step, these are all based on our raw data, and these are the metrics, and you can probably look at the number there's the number fulfilled, the number not fulfilled. So it's very analytic, but it is very persuasive that once we include someone in our honor society, we will get the commitment. And that is basically leads to my 6th step, which is make the national standards relevant to your organization. So this has really been my challenge. As I mentioned, we didn't have, we always count irrevocable commitments of any kind, but we were not counting anything revocable. We could keep track of them, but nobody really seemed to care. But the last, and I'll get into more examples in a few minutes, but but I've been able to start getting, now the management team is very interested in counting these. It's a big change for us. But I think to start, it's kind of like a twofold thing. To think about where you're already consistent with the national standards, sort of like, that's what worked for me. You think about what we already do. We already count pledged bequests, so that's bookable. We already we counted the contribution value of life income gifts. The disparity was there are probably 2 areas for us. We did not count face value of life income gifts, which is often counted in the national standards, and we did not count revocable. We counted what we were counting is the number of people in our legacy society, but not the amounts. But this exercise has gotten me to make that case using metrics, which is very persuasive. And I think, okay, so let me see. All right, so one of the things that I think is really important is making sure your organization has consistent definitions for everything. One of the challenges I see is everyone uses the term plan giving. Oh, is that plan gift? Oh, is it a plan gift? And I'll give you an example. So we mentioned to our board, oh, we're going to start counting plan gifts, and someone raised their hand. I pledged my entire estate. You never counted it? No, we did count it because it was irrevocable. So the term plan giving is part of the confusion in my organization. We need to be clear. We're talking about a type of plan giving that was not counted. Many things were already. And so it's really revocable plan giving, or maybe intentions versus legally binding commitments. So that's part of, I think, what's been my challenge in bringing the national standards to bear, and trying to bring my organization to accept them. Okay, so these are my steps. As you can see, and I'm going to go over some case studies now. They're very basic. And the last one, which the italics, is really the last one I just added now. I have to be perfectly honest, I didn't know that we were going to get there when I started this exercise. I was using it more to just show the success of my program, but not with this goal necessarily in mind. But it's really been amazingly helpful to make the case for that, for the standards. So it is a very nice outcome for me. So what I thought to do, ideally, I think this would be a really good roundtable discussion, but given that it's a webinar, and I know we'll have Q&A soon, this is going a little bit fast. I'm going to go through some case studies, and Nathan and Jen, if there's any questions that relate to this, I'm happy to answer them now, because it might be that it works better that way, but I'll leave that up to you. So case study number 1. Your CFO wants to know whether your programming is worth all the time and expense. You spend a lot of money traveling, invitations and lunch, and a lot of time spent in planning and following up. So, what kind of metrics can you do? Now, again, I'm going to show some examples from what I've found useful, and I hope they kind of maybe help you, but ultimately it's really going to be what is available to you. And I know I always get questions like, well, where do you start if I don't have this? And so, first year 1 is always going to be a little bit challenging, right? Because you may not have that much, but you can start comparing during the year, different events. So we'll start going through some of these examples. Again, this is one I used before. And what I like about the Legacy Society events is that you can just have 2 events. You can just start with 2 and then add the 3rd. And then you could, at the end of the year, accumulate all of them in each year and going forward. But you don't need, this is a basic starting place, because you don't need a ton of data on this. So if you are just starting, just start with this. And then, and I showed this example earlier, but I think now that we're thinking about it, you can then, if you're national, you have all this, but you could just break it up in some other way that you want to divide your data. So I do it by state, but you could probably have a different way of differentiating it. Again, it would just show the breadth of your success. So you could do it by age of donor that attend your Legacy Society event, or you could do it by capacity. We often look at, and I don't know if I think I included one with wealth capacity. So you could break that down. I have one of those here. So this is similar, actually. Let me show you. Okay. This one is really helpful, the wealth capacity. So this is where we just did this is the value of a wealth capacity screen on your database, because it becomes a very persuasive case that people see, wow, look at some of the people that attended this event. Mindful, by the way, that wealth capacity is probably 50% right, especially with an older crowd who may not have assets that are publicly disclosed. So it's not, again, about being accurate, but it's about using metrics to make your case and tell your story. So this is a really good slide to just show, wow, look at this. This year we had events, and we had, and you could do a lot more with this. You could say what percentage had estates over 500,000, or just the fact that one had estate over 10 million to 50 million may be enough to justify everything you're doing. The only thing that you need here is to pay for a wealth screening of your database, which is not insignificant, but it's really, I think it's worth it. Okay. There's some example. That's like a very tangible example. So let's go pretty quickly. So and so is the next one, but then we're going to get into more challenging ones. But I think starting with the tangible is sometimes the way to go, because you can get your arms around it, and you can you have this information at your disposal. This is a question kind of similar. Your chief marketing officer would like to know if your planned giving direct mail program is working. It's expensive. There's a big investment. And what's the return on investment? Because obviously the gifts are not coming necessarily in the envelope. You're getting different kinds of responses. And so a way to make this case would be, so again, this is an expansion of a chart I showed earlier, but we delineated all of our mailings over the course of a couple of years, and we add to this every year, every quarter, and we compare. And, so this one is interesting. So we had better responses. You could see, this is interesting. This is, again, pre-COVID and COVID, but you could see that we got more phone calls than mail. Phone calls were really up during COVID, which I think explains because mail was really, really slow during COVID. And you can also see that repeat gift annuitants were low, but we got great responses to virtual event, more than during the year before. It's a really interesting way of analyzing everything you're doing. And again, this is information you have. This is obviously a piece in time too. I wouldn't use, this is just an example of how you can analyze every single outreach that you have over the year after year after year. Again, this is page views. All right, so this is another way of sharing all of our leads in each year. So this is a broader one, but we have a total that we try to have of 150 leads. So you can see each year we combine all of our outreach from different events and phone calls, end of year mailing. RH is our New Year's mailing, Rosh Hashanah, our New Year's mailing, Honor Society mailing, and then we add them up with the goal of having a KPI. So in year 2, it actually isn't complete because we weren't done with the fiscal year. We ended up about the same as the year before, but if we were down, we would actually have a story to tell, and we would also have something to look at. So at least it shows consistency, but you can look at each individual category and tell a story in that regard too. You can say, again, phone calls were up, get this mailing worked better than that mailing. It has a lot of information here, and it really validates the work.
Hey, Stacy, this is
Yeah.
Jen. I just have a quick question for clarity on that last
Yes.
slide that you had.
Go back.
Someone's asking if you can explain what HS and RH mean.
Oh
and
yeah,
what
sure.
P.
I absolutely, yes. HS is our Honor Society. We did a separate mailing to members of the Honor Society. RH is Rosh Hashanah, which means Jewish New Year. So we do a calendar at the beginning of the year, just New Year's. But thank you for bringing that up.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. As the point of, as you can tell, this is what we do and use. This is not something I just for this presentation. It's got our own little nomenclature. Again, I showed this one before. All right, now is the more, I would say, the challenging one. The one that, the hard one, and this is where national standards are going to help. But, you've been asked to put together a presentation to your board to show the results of your planned giving department. And I'm speaking from personal experience. Everyone in my audience is about bottom line. They're not they want to know numbers and totals. And how do we do that given all the uncertainties that we have? I think this is the challenge that I've been struggling with from the beginning. And so these are some of the charts I put together that have been really helpful. So, you can look, we've had a very successful planned giving. So let's say this is actually this isn't really a chart, it's just a comparison, but it's percentage of planned gifts to the campaign. We've done very well. And then what we could do even further is average this, and actually we often say it's about 20 to 30% planned gifts. In this case, the definition of planned gifts is really helpful because sometimes planned gifts, whether in this case, it could just be people mean settled estates, do they mean booked estates, all sorts of things. So you have to define it, but you can make a very strong case that way, especially if you define it broadly. This, I already spoke about this chart, but this is probably the most persuasive one. Everyone loves 100%. This is similar. This talks about total legacy gifts received in about 11 years. So over 40,000 of most. And we talk about, this is an interesting chart. This talks about the percentage that had some kind of contact from a fundraiser. So they were either, they were either honor society or which is our legacy society. So 81% of our legacy gifts were either in our honor society, already in our legacy, or they had some contact. We have a category of donors we call loyalty donors. That's our internal categorization. They don't know that they are, but we treat donors 70 and up who have made a few modest gifts. It's the criteria is about 3 modest gifts over the last 10 years, under 100,000. So we're kind of not looking at major gift prospects. These are sort of our plan giving prospects. We treat them as loyal. We call them loyalty donors. And we include that. So we see a lot of those people turning into estate donors. So we really keep track of what percentage had contact versus no contact. And what this is a great example of how we make the case for the work that we're doing with these loyalty donors. You know, if by contact, hopefully, I mean, the causation has to be assumed, but you can see here, this is the number of our money received of legacy donors who had honor society and contact, some that just had contact. Most were people in our honor society, but the total of 81% is really persuasive. So basically there's this expression, and I always have to counter it. None of this money came over the transom. 80% of the money we received came from people that we reached out to, largely from the plan giving department, not entirely. And that's maybe if someone really wanted to poke, but we are tracking them, and we're tracking that. And it just shows that 80% of the people that we can't, it's very hard to show that if we work this way, we'll get the money. If we contact them, we'll get the money, but we can definitely show the outcome, which is of the money we got, 80% of people we had reached somehow during their lifetime. Now, this is where I think it's helpful to talk about trends as well. And I relied on CCS. There are other places, but you know, CCS, it's actually Giving USA. I think they just took the numbers and kind of gave it a little more, they organized it a little bit, but there's a couple of just information out there in the industry. You don't have to pay for them. I think Giving USA you might, CCS I don't think you do, which is what was really nice. But it talks about the growth of, you know, projections about bequest giving and how it's going to grow over time. And, you know, sort of the little, I guess this dip here is, there's a bit of a dip during pandemic time. This is how they project. There's a more recent one, obviously. This is projections. They probably expected to, there's probably more up-to-date one. But the point is, this is actually helpful in kind of filling out the picture for my board or for my management of where the trends are and why to support this. This is also from those statistics, but you could see that the donors who've been giving to you the longest are most likely to be the biggest supporters, the largest deferred gift. So the people who give you the largest deferred gift in their life are the people that have been supporting you the longest. And I think that's a great way, and these are just publicly available statistics, to make the case that you need to be in it for the long game. You need to talk to these long-standing donors to get their final gift.
Hey, Stacy,
Yeah.
it's Jen again.
Yeah.
We had a couple, actually a handful of people that wanted some clarification a couple slides ago.
Yeah.
If
Okay,
we could
good.
do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
So on this
This
slide,
one?
first of all, yeah. So they're just wondering if you can expand a little bit on what you mean by contact. Are you
Oh,
talking about
excellent.
phone calls, visits, emails? What's contact
We
mean?
are, if they had a person, there are two ways. They received, we were broad in this. You don't have to be this way. Again, this is what worked for me. I didn't want to go into any contact. So we know they received some mailing, some direct mail from us. Or a donor contacted them, or a fundraiser contacted them. So we would look in our CRM, you know, they had received some outreach from our organization. Again, you might be able to winnow it down. It may make your case not as strong. And if people ask, you'll have to. But there is a distinction we could make between a fundraiser. So I have other charts, I didn't include them. We could also analyze whether a fundraiser reached them. So certainly some who had an active fundraiser for 20 years, that might be another category you'd want to do. But
Sure.
because I'm trying to make the case that we need to have, this is my support for everything, direct mail, events, that they were invited to an event, or they received a direct mail, or they had a fundraiser. So I was broad. My point was versus there is that small amount that we didn't have any idea. And it really dispels the argument that this all came over the transom. Only a small amount did. Did
Sure.
that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also, just like what you said, you kind of had a broad definition of contact, but you could, if you had it in your CRM, you could divide these into buckets of types of contact.
Absolutely. And exactly. And you'd want to look at your data. You'd want to look at your data and then see what the results are, and then tell the story. So what I do is I'd have like a big chart. And then when I would want it, when I meet and have to answer the question, which I actually had to do, we have a new management team, and I had to make the case for all of this work. I told the story in a way that made the most, first of all, it was simplest for people to understand, not too many moving parts, but also that supported the position I was trying to make, which is all the efforts support, all the plan giving efforts are relevant, not just, one or the other, but you could winnow it down, obviously. Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
And then on the next slide, we have someone asking where that data came from. I think you mentioned Giving USA.
It's actually from Giving USA, which you pay for, but CCS has, and there's actually a newer one. I just didn't change the slides, but they're free. You could Google it and give your email, and they will give you. And I actually got the permission to do this, but they will just send you their data. They take it and they kind of put it into a really informative kind of overview, so you can have access to that data. But if anyone wants, I can send them the link after this.
And what does CCS stand for, Stacy?
I don't know. It's a consulting firm. What does it stand for?
Okay.
Well,
I can look that up. I can look that up.
I will be happy to give this. It's a consulting firm. They do show up at they do have a stand at various conferences, but I don't know. Yeah, look that up.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, so let's see. And this comes from that as well. All right, this is another one. Oh, CCF fundraising. I think it got cut off. That's the name of the company, by the way. It should have been on the other pages too, but so they talked about, this is really interesting, and a study that they have too, which talks about 50% of people don't change their planned gift over a lifetime, or 50 the value or the number, which means that once you're in their estate, they're most likely to keep you or obviously increase. So very few people decrease. This is a very persuasive slide to say that you just got to get in their will, and they'll keep you there. Okay. All right. The goal is, and I sort of said this already, but you're using the data, developing metrics to move your leadership constructively where you want them to be. It's a little manipulative perhaps, but you're using actual data. You're not making it up, but you are combining the data in a way that tells the story you want them to hear, to the extent you can. I mean, sometimes you obviously can't make it up, but people are persuaded by charts and by metrics, especially when it's based on the real data in your CRM or at your disposal. It's not, or when it's based on these third-party trends, I think it's very helpful too. This is a little bit tongue in cheek, but I need you to prepare an objective analysis proving I'm correct. It's a little circular, but it really has raw, but maybe all metrics are. I'm not going to say they're not. My son just graduated with a master's in data analytics. And, I think that a lot of metrics is to prove your point in a very persuasive way. But it's doable, and I find it very effective. So, we're going to have questions more questions in a couple minutes, but I do think there's another side to this that is really important. So yes, it's about telling your story, but it's really important that you can show that you're transparent and that you're accountable. And even if you don't get the goal, which is what the national standards, maybe it takes a long time, or to get every standard you want, but the fact that you have metrics and you have charts and analysis of what you're doing, of your direct mail, of your leads, of your events, and they're really not hard. Once you set them up, you can just maintain them. You can run queries. You just have to update them. It shows that you are transparent and accountable for what you do. And I have to say that we've used it to find our own weaknesses. So for example, we started during the pandemic doing a big calendar to all of our prospects, our loyalty prospects and legacy donors. So it's a lot of money. And what we included, a reply mechanism. So people could tell us we're in their estate or something like that. And the first year we got no responses. And we said, we're spending all this money on this beautiful calendar. It's a ton of work. Nobody's responding. Well, year 2, we said, let's change where we put the response. In year 1, it was inside, you open the calendar, it's in year 1, in the middle. So that we said that's probably assuming that person's going to keep that calendar. Probably a large chunk won't, and that they'll open it up in October, or I guess ours calendar started in September, and because of the Jewish calendar, or school calendar, and in January they're going to pull that thing off and send it in. So that didn't even mesh with how we were going to do an ROI. So the next year we made it that we paid to have it paperclip to the front. And it said, we're listening. And instead of just asking for, if we're in their will, we asked them to give us information of almost not a survey, but what do they want to get more information about? And we got tons of responses. And so we learned from that. One worked and one didn't. It's very obvious, but I think we can say to to the person asking, anyone, chief marketing officer or the board, you spent this money. This wasn't this year we got better. And I think people really respect when you can say that you are looking at it really with granularity and you're analyzing it and you're tracking it year to year and you're changing it and that you're adaptable. So that's, I think, a huge value. As I say here, there's another value that I have found, which is moving your leadership to first of all, grow in its understanding of plan giving. Just understand that what plan giving is. People can understand metrics. It's a little bit easier than just, some people like a story, but it backs it up in a way that a lot of people really appreciate. And again, making the case for national standards. I think that there are kind of 2 goals here. And one is to bring the national standards, but I think equally important, and even if that doesn't work, it's to find some standards that your organization appreciates for you. Whether it's just tracking attendance or leads, which is what we did for years. It's finding standards so that you can show that you are analyzing your work and that even amidst the uncertainty, there is some level of accountability in what you're doing. And you're not just making things up. So that is kind of the end. I'm happy to look at the questions now and any thoughts anyone has.
Yeah, so we actually have a couple specific, but in general, we had quite a few people. You talked about the national standards, and that seems to be a new term for a lot of people that are on the call today. And I do know it's something that it's been relatively new, has been rolled out just kind of recently. And actually, Nathan was part of the task force that came up with those. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about those and where they came from. I can also pull up the website if that's helpful.
Yeah, maybe. And I have to be perfectly honest, Nathan's a much better expert of this. I don't know if he wants to say something, if he's still there, than me. Because this is an area that, but we can, I'm happy to talk. So I welcome anyone else's thoughts on these. But the National Council of Plain Giving, I think Nathan chairs this, has national standards they recommend for counting plan gifts. So these standards, oh, there we go. I don't know, Nathan, if you want to give a few words.
Sure.
Here, I think that makes more sense. Great.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. And that's part of why I love this talk, because, these types of talks, for a variety of reasons, just getting people thinking about, and I made some notes here on some of the things you spoke around, starting with the audience. We're always trying to get support for the work that we're doing because of the long tail to plan giving. It's not as predictable or as immediate ROI like annual giving and things that are, tangible that we can touch and feel every year. And so this metrics conversation is critical. But yeah, the national standards, and as you can see on your screen, Jen has brought it up. The link is really just charitablegiftplanners.org, and then it's /NSGPS, National Standards for Gift Planning Success. But it started honestly as a metrics initiative 6 years ago, and a lot of really smart people and volunteers from around the country, from smaller shops, bigger shops, consulting side of the world, trying to figure out, and I think you addressed some of this today, Stacy, the different nomenclature that we use and the CRMs that we use, and how do we track the success, whether it's programmatically or individually. And so we kind of took a step back from an actual metrics initiative. And I know there's some questions on metrics and the national standards in our Q&A area too. But the national standards really are 16 standards that were created, and it's a very much a living, breathing thing on how do we as gift planners in 3 different pillars for success make the case. What is the case we can make for support from the top? As we're building our programs with best practices and some of the things that even Stacy gave us to think about and look at today, how do we build it with the appropriate capacity and ability to execute? You may see your fellow nonprofit down the street and say, hey, I want to do what they're doing. Look at the great success they're having, but that may not be realistic year one. So what's realistic where you're at? And then how do you build it with a donor-centric mindset? And, knowing full and well, we have goals that we're all accountable for, and the KPIs as we look to 2023, which we were talking is all of 6 weeks away. How do we build for success, knowing full and well, it's based on a donor's timeline and when they get to this. So yeah, the national standards, and thank you, Jen, for kind of walking through this. There's a lot of resources out there. And I know Stacy referenced it quite a bit. And there's even on the main page of that, there's 3 different assessments people can take to really just, and whether it's individually you at your shop, there they are right there in the middle, those 3 yellow boxes, or even the blue boxes there, you can choose either one. To kind of really have an honest, candid, take on where are we at with our program. Council-wise, councils are doing it across the country to inform programs that they're bringing to their membership. Organizationally, I've had colleagues that have not only taken it themselves, the assessment, but have had their staff take it to see where are they aligned. Maybe there are some gaps in where they thought they were having success and where they weren't, or even leadership taking it, the assessment, to see, what's their perspective, or, what is their perception on where our program is. So yeah, I saw that come up a couple of times and did want to kind of bring too, because Stacy, I applaud all the work that you're doing on organizational level, and then again, kind of bringing it back and tying it to this bigger picture of standards aspect.
One thing you talked about that I have to be honest, mine net doesn't, but maybe it does by alluding, is we don't really talk about the donor in any of my presentation. It's all about the donor. And I think that's where the national standards, it's kind of like taking the place of that in my analysis, because that is ultimately the donor's timeline. Nothing of what I said is actually, it's all about the audience of the management or the board, what they want to hear. But ultimately, it's really about the donor's timeline. It's kind of meshing. And I've always said, when a donor puts you in their will, whether they write something or not, they feel like they've made a gift. So how do we acknowledge that in our end? And that's been my challenge, to be honest, with my organization, because we are all about bottom line. And maybe every organization is different, but that's really what motivated me to get to this exercise, and help using the national standards as like that proxy. Like revocable gifts really are a gift, they're really a gift. The donor made a gift. How do I get my leadership to kind of accept that that needs to be counted in some way as well?
You know, and I think that's a great point. And I know, Jen, there's some specific questions to actual some areas of Stacy's talk that I think we need to get to. But two real quick things there, Stacy, that you just mentioned in regards to everybody's in a version of making the case.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's constantly, I think, you know, we've been fortunate in the last couple of years. Russell James has done some terrific work, even when he speaks to how he made the case to his own board at Texas Tech and how using it, you spoke to some of the nomenclature, even internally that we may have, or even within this industry, you know, his board didn't understand or fully couldn't get their head around plan giving. And so he changed some of the vernacular and spoke to it as major gifts of assets. And it really registered. They understood major gifts. They understood assets. So how do we use that? And I think you also have a slide here around resources early on as you're trying to make the case. Depending on your organization, and even everybody is on this call today, we all have different levels or different confidence in the data that's been collected over the years. And you may not be able to pull all these things in. I know one of the things in that first pillar of the national standards is making the internal case for support, the business plan for plan giving. And yeah, you want to bring in, you know, do we know what our average gift size is, or do we know some of these criteria? But, you know, not everybody has all the same stuff, and that's okay. But what do you have where you can use for a starting point?
Exactly. That's exactly how so Jen, what's the question?
Oh, I was just going to say, Tina was asking where can the standards be found. I did want to let you know that I dropped the URL in the chat. Even though I restricted it, I can send a chat out to you. So if you guys want to check the chat, there's a link. That is the homepage of the National Association of Gift Planners homepage for just the standards that I was scrolling through. So that's where you can find that. And then a couple questions, Stacy, specific to your presentation. Early on, Joanna was asking some of the charts that you were showing. Were those just plan giving donors? Were you isolating the donors that you knew were just plan giving, or was that kind of all donors?
The answer is yes and no. I mean, it was all people who responded. So if it was a chart about attendance, it was whoever attended. Now, who do we invite? Are plan giving donors and prospects. But those charts are just everybody who fulfills those criteria in our database. But those by definition, those are our plan giving donors. I hope that answers that question.
If not, she can go ahead and ask again.
You can email me later. I'm happy to.
Yeah. Terry's wondering, you talked about loyalty donors. What criteria do you use to call someone a loyalty
This is like
donor?
almost another talk, but I'm happy to answer this because this is like something that we use data to figure this out. It started in 2014. We were mining all of our data, and we found out that most of the people that responded to all of our mailings and to come to our events were donors over 70 who had made a couple of gifts over the last 10 years, not necessarily in year one. And then we looked at the people who left us in their will. It was almost revert. And it turns out most of them were those people. So we decided proactively to carve out that crowd. And this is actually Plan Giving 101. They teach you it's the older, modest annual donors that become your best prospects. But we use data to prove this. And as a result, we define it, our main body for that are people 70 and up who've made 3 gifts out of the last 10 years. And we use a cap of 100,000 only because if they gave more than 100, they are probably on some fundraisers radar. And this actually is an area that we're probably massaging a little bit more, but it's just because it would be too big of a list, but it's 100,000 and under, but 3 gifts in the last 10 years. We run that report every year, and those people get all of our direct mail. They get special mailings, they get calendars, they get special gifts. We even have a dedicated staff person whose job is to really cultivate those people and give them attention. Not all of them need it. It's a lot of people, but we want to make sure those people get extra attention because it turns out they're the ones responding to everything. They're the ones coming to things, and they're the ones leaving us in their estate. We've also had a few other categories. I know we're running out of time. Like people who over 70 but gave a lot, over $100,000 20 years ago, or some number, I can't remember, but they stopped giving. We include them in that category too.
I think that's helpful. There's a questions. You had your chart about how many people that left you in their will, it ended up coming to fruition, and it was a very high percentage. And this person is wondering, they've heard different statistics on that, people leaving, it doesn't come to fruition. I think even Stelter, Nathan, we had a stat around that. Once a bequest is in their will, how often is it actually taken out? Russell James has a statistic that they've heard 80% change within the last 5 years of their life. You guys have any ideas on all those different
I
statistics?
know. I mean,
being
this is
thrown out?
my statistic is for me, what works for us because of I think it's the rigor. I think it actually speaks to how we steward those donors. That's the message. We have had very good because once we know we're in their will, and maybe that's one of the distinctions. If you don't know, you can't steward. And that's really the purpose of a legacy society, which could be another conversation, but it's really to get people to self-identify so that once we know we're in their will, we steward them a lot to make sure we stay there. And that's really the message of that, why we have 100%, because we really have added more to our stewardship of those people. And we make sure that we don't let them take us. There's no way we're going to let that go. I think the CCS had a statistic that 50% of the people keep their will and another 45 increase. So how those all coalesce, I don't know. But I think some of it has to do with knowing that you're in their will and stewarding them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Actually, I was just talking to one of our clients yesterday that they got the approval just recently, a couple months ago, to hire a full-time director of stewardship for their plan giving program.
Yes.
And I've always thought that stewardship goes hand in hand with plan giving, but as we talk to our leadership, sometimes they make the case and they're like, well, it's not a revenue generator. But I would argue it's easier to keep a plan giving donor and grow a plan giving donor than it is to find a new one.
100% agree.
And that is such a critical part of the world we live. So when you look at those numbers on 80% of people change in the last 5 years, it depends on age, it depends on a lot of criteria. But at the core of that is giving people a reason to self-identify, and once they do, being good stewards and being good relationship builders.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And with that, we do have a handful more, but we are out of time. So I wanted to let you know, if you do have additional questions we didn't get to, or you think of something over the next day or so and you want to reach out, Stacy has given her email address. You can find that on the screen, sulman@acwis.org. You can also reach out to Nathan or myself. And if you'd like to know more about Stelter's services, you can visit us at stelter.com. Also, we did record it today, and we will be offering the recording of the presentation along with a PDF of Stacy's handouts. And those will be available on stelter.com/webinars in the next couple days, by Friday for sure. I will send you an email out to let you know when it's there. So if you just want to wait for my email to access them, that'd be fine. So that's all the time we have. Stacy, so much. Thank you so much for the last hour. I know you have a really busy week this week, so we appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Happy to respond to questions, but it'll be after tomorrow. I have a busy day.
Sure. You've got a big day tomorrow,
Yeah.
so I understand that. And thanks, Nathan, for being here with us too.
No, thank you, Stacy. Thanks, Jen. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.